Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is What If Minato in the Body of Naruto Part 1 and you're watching Milton_fanfiction. I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for your amazing support. We've just hit 309 subscribers, and I'm blown away by your enthusiasm. If you're new here, consider joining the community by subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and leaving a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Let's keep pushing forward and aim for that 1,000 subscriber milestone. Now, let's dive into today's epic Naruto fanfiction story.
Here is a short summary. After helplessly watching the murder of his son by the hands of the civilians he had sworn to protect, Minato Namikaze is broken. When the god of death offers the chance to walk among the living once more, he accepts. Only catch is, he has to live in the body of his son, Naruto Uzumaki. How will the world change with the yellow flash taking his son's place? But before we start the story, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also share this video with your friends. Now let's start to begin the story. The end is only a new beginning. Minato Namikaze, Fourth Hokage of the village hidden in the leaf, the famed and feared yellow flash, stared from the stomach of the Shinigami at the lifeless 7-year-old child, his body strewn in an unnatural position in a small alleyway in Konoha. The child who had the brightest most unmanageable blonde hair, so bright it was as though it were dipped into liquid sunshine, now lay soaked in his blood. His eyes, so dull and lifeless behind his eyelids, had once shone brighter than the summer blue sky. Minato's heart ran cold, his body frozen stiff, and mind unable to comprehend that his baby boy, his Naruto, was dead. Murdered. In a single moment, it all came crashing down on him, and Minato fell to the floor, shattered completely at the sight. He couldn't understand how something so horrific could happen in the village he gave his life to protect. He couldn't understand why the villagers, in their drunken stupor, beat a child, someone who could never protect himself, to the ground with absolute glee written on their faces. He couldn't understand why the Anbu, stationed to protect him, had turned a deaf ear to the cries and desperate pleads for help his Naruto screamed until his voice could no longer. Most of all, he couldn't understand why his last wish was so blatantly disregarded. His son was a hero. His son was the reason he had been able to defeat the Kyuubi no Kitsune. His son was supposed to be loved and cared for because he was the jailer of the most powerful of all the tailed beasts. That was what he wished for his son to be looked upon as the hero he was. Instead, his son laid lifeless on the cold gravel, forgotten. Why wasn't he treated as a hero? Why had Sarutobi failed to fulfill his final wish? Why had this happened? Where were his godparents? Why hadn't Jiraiya and Tsunade taken him in after his death as they were supposed to? There were no thoughts of vengeance for his son, all there was pain and utter sadness. In his agonizing mourning, Minato hadn't noticed the tears that streamed endlessly down his face, nor the soft touch of a hand grasping his shoulder. He was numb. It was only when the hand began to shake him lightly did Minato look up, his eyes mirroring his shattered heart, to the dark-cloaked god of death, Shinigami-sama. More no longer, Minato Namikaze, the god said in an unearthly voice, Kami personally took him from the mortal plane. His suffering is over. After an eternity of dealing with the dead, Shinigami still hadn't a clue with how to deal with parents mourning the death of a child. It was an unnatural occurrence. Parents were meant to outlive their children, the children meant to bury their parents, not the other way around. While it was true Namikaze had outlived his son, he hadn't been allowed to rest in peace like the other souls, for the price of the ceiling denied him that. Minato stared at the death god, his words ringing through his ears in a loop until it finally sunk in. Kami-sama took him purposefully? He asked in a low shaken voice. Yes. The boy was too innocent. Naive. Forgiving. Had he lived any longer, he would have been dealt pain worse than death. I failed him. His voice was broken, his head hung low in his unimaginable shame, and guilt began to eat him whole. He had sealed the Kyuubi in his son. He had given his life for the village naively thinking that they would accept him for the boy he was, and not the demon he held. He had killed his own son through his action. His pain in life was no consequence of your actions, Minato Namikaze, but the actions of a few who refused to listen to his and Sarutobi. So, Sarutobi-sama tried. The god nodded, I don't know what to feel, happy he tried, or angry he failed. After a short silence, Shinigami-sama walked around to face Minato directly, his body shrunken down to the human size. You have always been an honorable man, Minato Namikaze. The purest shinobi soul I have had the pleasure of meeting. Shinigami-sama said, breaking the silence, should you wish it, I shall take you back to the world of the living, to allow you to walk among man once more. To live, die, and see those you've lost with Kami once it ends again. At this Minato stared at him unblinkingly in shock, but only through the life of your son. For a moment, the once Yondaime was speechless. The death god was giving him the option to go back, to live once more in his son's body. Then, once he had lived in death he would be able to see his friends, Kushina and Naruto. The answer didn't come as easily as he hoped. A part of him was screaming to accept, if only for the end benefits. The other wanted to deny the offer for it didn't know whether it would be able to stop from killing all those who had harmed his son. Yet, he could attain his son's dreams for him. He could change the views the village had of his son, become Hokage once more for the sake of his son. Make haste with your decision, Namikaze, for the life of the body shall end shortly. In truth, Shinigami had his reasons for allowing such a thing to occur. Taking his mind off the mortal plane for just a moment had led to the death of the chosen one, prophesied by fate to change the very course of the world. Kami would not allow her purest soul to live through a lifetime of pain, and so it was his duty to convince this man to take his place. Such would be a suitable replacement, if not better. Minato Namikaze was a gem among coals in terms of souls. While he was naive in his life to certain extents, he hadn't a shadow of a doubt that he would change the world for the better. Taking a single shaky breath, Minato said just the words Shinigami was hoping he would say. I accept. Allowing a small smile grace his deathly features, Shinigami unsheathed his sword and looked with a small amount of amusement at the wide-eyed man in front of him. Good, he said, goodbye Minato Namikaze. We shall meet each other once again, but let us hope it shan't be soon. With a wide, frightening grin, Shinigami brought her sword down upon Minato, slicing through his body with ease, and watched as the body of a man become a small silver glow before it disappeared into the body of Naruto Uzumaki. I look forward to seeing you live once more, Namikaze. Let us see what you do in the world. Pain. That was the very first thing that processed through Minato's mind. Unrepentant, merciless pain. He could feel his body shake and twitch, the subtle movements giving him a clear feel of his body. His poor Naruto was so tiny. So small. So fragile. Taking a few calming breaths, Minato attempted to open his eyes, the sudden burst of white causing him to grimace and shut his eyes once more. After a short moment, he attempted again, this time prepared for the sudden onslaught of color and was able to adjust without much pain. His eyes, or rather Naruto's, were met with a dull white ceiling that he knew simply all too well, and not just because of Naruto's memories, which were rapidly embedding themselves in his mind, but because he had spent more than a fair enough amount of time in a room identical to the one he laid in. The hospital. Of course he would be taken to the hospital once someone realized he was in fact alive. It didn't, however, mean he liked it. Appreciated, sure. Liked. Never. Naruto's memories of glaring nurses and subpar treatment from the doctors only made his distaste more pronounced. And as if on some unannounced cue, Hiruzen Sarutobi walked into the small room. Inflicted from punching and hugging the man left Minato to simply stare as the Sandaime Hokage walked in with a grandfatherly smile plastered on his face. The Naruto side of him wanted to scream, old man. Come to get me out. While Minato was pretty sure he wanted to cause him physical harm. One thought was, however, agreed upon with both sides. The man looked old. 7 years and you look like you aged 15. What happened to you, Sarutobi? Minato couldn't help but wonder, only to be brought back to reality when said man finally spoke. How are you feeling, Naruto? He asked, sincere concern laced in his voice. I'm fine. He replied automatically, his voice a little raspy, no doubt from the damage his vocal cords had taken from all the screaming. The slight frown on Sarutobi's face was enough to tell Minato that he didn't believe him. But what did he expect? Technically, Naruto died in that attack. He couldn't possibly be expecting sunshine daisy happy-go-lucky Naruto. From the memories he had from other encounters like this, which had him internally seething, this was how Naruto acted. But the mask. One he was determined to break. Just slowly. Changing himself so abruptly would leave some unwanted questions. He didn't plan on telling anyone it was actually him who was now Naruto. It would just cause trouble and a lot of time wasted on explaining just how he came to control Naruto's body. I'm glad to hear that, Naruto. Sarutobi said, breaking Minato out of his thoughts. It looks like you won't be able to leave till tomorrow though. With that, Minato couldn't help but let a groan escape his lips. He was not looking forward to spending more than a day in the place. It wasn't as though they were actually healing him anyhow. From his memories, it seemed Naruto had an amazing healing rate. He chalked it up to a side effect of having the Kyuubi sealed in his body, as he did design the seal to kill the demon should he perish. And he doubted the Kyuubi wanted to die, so healing his vessel was one way to prevent it from happening. Or make it easy. Sorry Naruto. If going by the look Sarutobi had on his face was saying anything, he was quite amused with his unwillingness to stay in the hospital. Rest and when you get out we can go get ramen. But the slight bags under his eyes, Minato could see that the man hadn't had a good night's sleep in some time. Ignoring the promise of ramen, he asked, how long was I out? In a low voice. The sudden question looked to have taken the Hokage back a bit but answered nonetheless. 3 days. His voice was controlled, but Minato could hear the concern and anger in it, however subtle it was. So you really do care? Oh, okay. It was clear that his replies were beginning to worry Sarutobi, the creases in his face becoming more pronounced as the conversation went on. Naruto, he began, sounding worried, are you sure you're alright? A part of him wanted to scream, no you effing senile old man. I'm not. I died. But he restrained himself and answered honestly, I'm just tired, avoiding answering the question directly. He was sure if he did answer it, it wouldn't be that far off from what he wanted to scream. Looking resigned and tired himself, Sarutobi said, alright, Naruto. Get some rest and I promise we'll go for ramen tomorrow when you're all better. Hi, Gigi. Minato said if only to set the man a bit at ease before closing his eyes and letting unconsciousness take hold of his small form once more. Before he completely drifted off, he could hear the soft click of the door shutting behind a retreating Sarutobi. As soon as Hiruzen Sarutobi, Sandaime Hokage sat back in his office, he couldn't help but let his shoulders sag in relief and guilt. Naruto had been found in an alleyway so broken. The blood loss was enough to kill his small body, coupled with multiple broken bones and internal injuries, he was nearly certain Naruto was dead. He practically fell to his knees when the thought came, only for it to leave with haste as soon as he saw the small, shallow rises and falls of his chest. As soon as they had gotten him to the hospital, he was put in intensive care, his most trusted doctors and nurses the only ones allowed to even go near him. From everything the boy had been through, he wouldn't put it past a close-minded nurse or doctor to kill the boy while he was unconscious. How he wished things had turned out differently, if he had been able to explain to the civilians just what Minato had done to seal the Kyuubi before those blasted rumors had spread, then maybe they wouldn't be so hell-bent on killing him. Yet at the same time he hated himself for being so helpless to do anything to make Naruto's life easier. He, the Hokage, had been put out by damn politics to help him. The civilian council wouldn't allow him to be adopted by anyone. Even when there were a number of shinobi clans who were more than willing. Taking a deep breath, he couldn't help but be worried about how Naruto really was. He had an aching, heart-wrenching feeling that the boy's innocence had been utterly destroyed that night. He could see it in Naruto's eyes. Once, they had practically sparkled with childish happiness and mischief. But now, they seemed to have grown a bit darker, haunted, cautious. He knew this day would come, what with the boy wanting to be a shinobi, so he could become Hokage. He just wished it wasn't so soon. He had wanted to keep the boy innocent for a while yet, to be a kid for just a bit longer. The fate seemed to be working against him. I swear, Naruto. I'll do everything I can to help you. He thought to himself with a determined glint in his eyes. There comes a time when enough is enough, and he had most certainly had it. It was official. Minato Namikaze was going to snap. He had been awake for all of 30 minutes, and the doctor, whom he remembered was kind and did his job, just wouldn't stop fussing over him. The aging medic Nin kept prodding the skin where his worst injuries had been, triple-checking his charts, and so forth. It was absolutely annoying and unnecessary. So far, they had proved to be worse than when he was stuck in the hospital all those years ago. Sure they fussed over him, especially during the height of the war, but they were never this bad. Maybe it was because of the war that they didn't have the luxury of fussing over him. He was sure those nurses would be more than happy to take care of him during his recovery. Damn fangirls. Still, his resigned composure during the final checkup gave him time to plan a little on how to live as Naruto. From all the memories given to him, it was clear his son was a ball of absolute sunshine. Never cried, never complained, never stopped smiling in the face of others, his poor baby boy had learned long ago to keep it all inside. Crying never got anything done. Complaining never changed anything. Anything else only caused pain. His son had changed his outer appearance just so that people wouldn't hurt him. Internally, Minato was fighting to maintain control of his Kai. It wouldn't do to have him accidentally leak it in front of a medic who was obviously on Sarutobi's good graces. He knew that the Hokage saw Naruto for Naruto rather than the fox, but he knew that he was worried the seal would somehow break or that it was allowing the Kyuubi to influence him. To be honest, it was a little insulting. The seal he had created to contain the Kyuubi was his best work. It was the masterpiece among masterpieces. Hell, he had given his soul to the Shinigami to complete it. Didn't that tell him of the seal's power? Evidently not. Still, that didn't change the fact that he needed to do everything in his power to change the outlook on his son. At 7 years of age he would be starting the academy soon. It usually started at the end of summer, around September, but after the Kyuubi attack, the academy started in the beginning of November and ended at the start of July. Of course, with the way he was now, Minato was sure he could pass the written portion of the graduation exam with little difficulty. Being Hokage, if only for a short while, had caused him to know the ins and outs of all of Konoha's laws. The other aspects such as mathematics, language arts, history and so on were something that only improved with experience. Maybe not history, but for the most part he was pretty sure he lived through the history they would be learning. What he really needed to work on was the more physical aspects of his ninja career. Ninjutsu, Taijutsu, and Jinjutsu. From the feel of his chakra stores, chakra control was going to be a pain to get down. Thanks to the Kyuubi, Naruto was a chakra powerhouse. Thanks to that his stamina was off the charts, which somewhat explained why he could hardly remember being able to sit still for very long. He had too much energy to burn. Ninjutsu wouldn't come easily as the very first thing he needed to do was get better control. It would take a very long time before he'd be able to walk on the trees, let alone water. Shadow clones would do wonders in helping him, especially since with the amount of chakra he had at his disposal, he was a one-man army. But of course he couldn't. Page Bunshin was a forbidden S-rank technique of the leaf because of the amount of chakra required and the backlash of memories from the clone. No way would someone just teach a 7-year-old kid to do that, so all of a sudden being able to do it would be like painting a bright neon sign pointing at him that said, "Here I am. I'm a suspicious person just begging to be sent to the TI department." He'd have to wait till he was able to wrangle it out of one of the jonins. As for techniques, he should be able to go to the library to read up on the more basic techniques, if only to relieve any suspicion. But learning elemental techniques would have to wait till he could find someone to either teach him or until he was put on a genin team and ask his sensei then. Damn it, I'm too young to do any good ninjutsu. Minato thought to himself. Working on taijutsu would be simple enough. Going through the katas he remembered secretly before officially learning them in the academy would do him wonders. Maybe he could even sneak out to watch a couple of the jonins train to make it more plausible that he simply copied what he'd seen, should he ever be caught. The best thing about being a kid though was that no one would think twice about one running around in the city. He could probably make it into some sort of obstacle course to help him further. After all, running around a track or the city limits was a telltale sign of training. Running around like a little kid was hardly considered training. Other than that, doing push-ups, sit-ups and so forth could be done in the confines of his home was simple enough. Ninjutsu on the other hand would be far more difficult. Like medic jutsus, Jinjutsu required a lot of chakra control and extreme focus. Something that Naruto wouldn't be able to accomplish. Hell, even he had been subpar at Jinjutsu in his life. So it wasn't a major loss. He wasn't sure about how he would change the civilians' opinion of him before he became a ninja though. Civilians as a whole were idiots. Fearful of anything that was different and completely dependent on the shinobi forces to protect them. The best he could do was not antagonize them in any way, shape, or form. So all the plans Naruto had been making for pranks were thrown out the window completely. At least the ones that targeted the civilian populace. Pranking shinobi would help him in stealth and avoiding the enemy. After all, he would have to relearn how to mask his presence, and practicing against a higher-ranking shinobi would help him greatly in that regard. Besides, pranking was hardly considered training as well, and no one would expect a thing. Maybe being a kid isn't so bad, it most certainly had its perks. Being able to hide behind the facade of a child would always be able to give him the element of surprise, something that was always an advantage to have as a shinobi. "Alright, Naruto," the medic, Mizumi Hankuro, said, breaking his train of thought, "looks like you're all healed." Finally, Minato murmured, much to Mizumi's amusement. "Okage-sama said to wait for him here so he can take you out to Ichiraku's," for she looked at the clock and saw it read 12:47 p.m., lunch. The kind smile on her face was enough for Minato to reciprocate it. She seemed to truly care about his health, something that was rare for Naruto. While it was hardly enough, Minato was glad Naruto had gotten a few people in his life that cared for him and gave him small bouts of sincere happiness. "Thanks, Mizumi-san," he said politely, and while he was sure it wasn't a good thing, Minato was greatly amused by her suddenly shocked expression. Yeah, no problem, Naruto." She stumbled before finally compassing herself with the same smile. Was it really that shocking to see Naruto act politely? Considering he called the Hokage Jiji in public would probably make that a yes. "Nah, Mizumi-san, is there any clothes I could wear? I think mine, they're too ripped," he asked in a low, somewhat shy voice. "Ah, thank you years of shinobi deception." "Oh. Of course, Naruto," Mizumi said looking a bit flustered, "I'll go bring you some right now." With that, the kind woman scrambled out of the room leaving Minato to chuckle a bit. She reminded him of Rin, the poor girl always acted so flustered whenever he spoke to her alone or directly, though admittedly she got better at hiding it with time. Rin, the one thought made him realize that some of the people he had left behind were still here. Kakashi, Guy, Shikaku, Inoichi, Chaoza, Hiashi, Hizashi, hell, even Fugaku, they're all still here. Of course he could never, or rather wouldn't ever, tell them the truth. After 7 years their wounds had been healed, the scars had faded, suddenly telling them that he was in the body of his son would only reopen them and cause them more pain in the end. At least, that was what he continued to tell himself. He knew, from the one glance at Kakashi's solemn face before he performed the seal, that he had hurt the boy in more ways than he could imagine. He was, however, pleasantly surprised to see that Kakashi had truly watched over his son to the best of his abilities as Inu. He was the only one that actually broke up the fights that began, the only one that made sure he got home safe, and the only one to not emit Kai toward him. He even accidentally showed himself to Naruto to let him know that there were people who cared about him. But all Kakashi. Minato thought to himself with a grin. While he couldn't make friends with his old ones, he could make friends with their children. All of whom were near his age. He wondered if the apple did indeed fall far from the tree. Only time would tell, it seemed. Here we are. Mizumi's voice rang in the room, causing him to turn to the grinning brunette. In her hands were a folded clump of clothes. Hokage-sama should be here really soon, so get changed and wait a little while longer for your ramen, she said before turning to let him change in private. As soon as she was out the door, Minato couldn't help but shake his head in amusement and exasperation. It seemed that other than her speech tick of Databane, his son also inherited a near-obsessive love for ramen. Though it shouldn't surprise him, during her pregnancy, Kushina had just about every single ramen that was made or bought in Konoha. She had even sent out a few missions for teams to go pick some up from neighboring cities. Getting out of the hospital bed, Minato went to the small pile of clothes and saw they were standard kid clothes. A pair of loose-fitting black pants, a white regular t-shirt and a warm-fitting navy jacket with dark orange cuffs and zipper. Again, as if on some unannounced cue, Sarutobi walked inside the room looking better than he had the day before. "Ah, Naruto, good to see you're up and about," he said with a relieved smile. "Come on, let's go eat." What surprised him was not that Sarutobi wasn't in his Hokage outfit, but that he had offered his wrinkled hand for him. This most certainly never happened to Naruto before, though he certainly had tried. The memories of Naruto's indecision to grasp the Hokage's hand, as he'd seen so many kids do with their parents, came rushing at him suddenly. He had to blink a few times to get a firm grasp at reality. He could see the worry in Sarutobi's eyes, especially after his hesitation, so he took the hand slowly and couldn't help but feel a small warmth bloom in the center of his chest. This was something both Minato and Naruto shared. Neither had the comfort of a family. In life, Minato had been in the orphanage for as long as he could remember. He hardly remembered his mother, and he hadn't a clue as to who his father was. In all honesty, Jiraiya, despite his pervertish tendencies, had been like a father to him, but even then something as small as grasping his hand in comfort had never happened to him. At least now his son was with his mother, happy with the familial unconditional love a parent gave to their child. Looking back to Sarutobi, Minato gave the aged man a genuine grin that caused the man to reciprocate it happily. It didn't take long for the two of them to make it to Ichiraku's raiment stand, though looking at the glares he had been given by the villagers, he was sure this was one of the reasons Sarutobi had offered his hand. No one would, after all, dare attack Naruto when in the presence of the Hokage. "Ah. Hokage-sama. What can I get you?" Tuchi Ichikaru asked before turning to Naruto. "There you are, Naruto. We've missed you these past few days." Minato couldn't help but smile at the man. From everything he remembered, Tuchi was the one who made sure he was well fed, even made him pay less for ramen after seeing how small and skinny he was. He was, after all, their best customer, and never once had they looked at Naruto in a negative light. "Hi," Minato said, brightened by the man's grin and genuine happiness to see him. "Can I get miso ramen?" he asked with a wide grin. "Coming right up. Hokage-sama?" he asked, turning to the leader of the village. "I'll have the same, Tanuchi-san," Sarutobi said with a pleasant grin. He was always happy to see people who cared for Naruto like this. It was so rare to find someone who didn't see him as a demon that he couldn't help but smile. "Right away, Hokage-sama. Am. To miso," Tuchi exclaimed to his daughter. "Got it, To-san," the pretty brunette replied. "Hi Naruto. How are you?" she asked happily while getting the ingredients for miso ramen. "I'm all better now, Am ni," Minato said as if compelled to call her sister. "I guess some of Naruto is infused in me now," Minato thought to himself. It would certainly explain a bit and help with becoming his son to the outside world. "Good to hear, Naruto. I'll get the orders up in just a bit," she replied before turning to help her father. Ichiraku's had always been a sort of sanctuary to Naruto. Here, he could eat without anyone kicking him out. Here, he could talk happily and openly. Here, they treated him like a person. Sarutobi and Minato sat waiting for their food in a comfortable silence, though Sarutobi was a bit concerned that the small blonde hadn't been chatting away in his usual manner. It was just more confirmation that Naruto had changed after that night, and as much as he wished he hadn't, Naruto had lost most, if not all of his innocence that night. "Nah, Gigi." Minato began towards Sarutobi. Yes, Naruto? The small blonde looked down from the soft gaze of the Hokage, shifting in his seat to look a bit uncomfortable, if not nervous. Do you think you can teach me that ninja technique? He began in a soft voice. The one where you poof to look like a different person. Minato honestly had to applaud his acting skills, he sounded just like a child would. Sarutobi, on the other hand, looked at Naruto with a questioning gaze. Why would you want to learn that, Naruto? He asked gently, already dreading the answer. He just knew he wasn't going to like the answer. Shifting more in his seat, Minato looked up to the Hokage with slightly watered eyes and said, I just thought that if I didn't look like me, they wouldn't hurt me. He finished in nothing short of a whisper, his eyes looking once again at the wooden countertop. Hiruzen had to close his eyes for a moment, taking in a single slightly shaking breath before he turned to the boy beside him. Minato's boy, his only son wanting to learn how to change his appearance so that people wouldn't hurt him. How he had failed, completely and utterly failed Minato. Turning to the small blonde, Sarutobi placed a hand on his sagged shoulders, causing him to look up at him. I'll teach it to you, Naruto. He said with a forced smile, but Minato could see from the look of his sunken eyes that he was actually saying, I'm so sorry, Naruto. Even so, Minato smiled happily. This would help him get back to a healthy weight, as now he would be able to turn himself into a completely different person to buy his food. No more rotten fruits and vegetables, no more overpriced items, no more half-ruined clothes, he would be able to get everything the way he was supposed to get them in the first place. Okay, while we're waiting I'll tell you a bit about it. Sarutobi began, gaining the full focus of the small blonde. The technique you're talking about is called the transformation technique and is an E-rank ninjutsu, the lowest and easiest class for ninjutsu. Essentially, it allows the user to change into anything they desire. People, plants, animals, inanimate objects. It's considered one of the harder E-rank ninjutsu because it requires a constant flow of chakra to keep the form. Chakra, Naruto, is the molding of both your spiritual and physical energy. Minato did his best to look as focused and deeply interested as possible as Sarutobi continued his explanation on chakra and the transformation technique, but he really didn't want to. This was something that he knew the ins and outs of, heck, he even understood the complicated henge technique Tsunade uses to maintain a younger appearance. He was silently sighing in relief once Sarutobi showed him the hand seals for the technique and how to feel the chakra flowing through his body as he did so. He purposefully fouled up the first few attempts as would be expected out of a 7-year-old untrained kid. On his fourth try, he made himself look like an exact replica of Sarutobi and started laughing genuinely when said man's pipe fell out of his mouth. Popping out of the technique, Minato had the widest grin plastered on his face. See that, Jiji? Minato exclaimed, fully channeling his son, I'm going to become the best ninja ever. Once Sarutobi regained his composure, he couldn't help but smile and chuckle softly at Naruto, overjoyed that he hadn't lost all of his childish innocence. Ruffling the small blue-eyed boy's hair, he said, I look forward to seeing that day, Naruto. The rest of their time together was spent eating and making idle conversation with Tucci and Aim before the Hokage had to get back to his office and attempt to win the war against paperwork. Minato could honestly say that particular aspect of being Hokage was something he most definitely did not look forward to getting back to. It never ended. But as a kid, he wouldn't have to deal with any paperwork. The simple joys of being a child. Making his way home, Minato kept a soft, polite smile on his face and completely ignored the death glares sent his way. Using the memories that it infused with him, Minato did not look forward to having to clean his shabby apartment. It was expected out of an orphan to not have good cleaning habits, as those were usually instilled by nagging parents, but Minato would make sure that his home remained as clean as he could possibly keep it. Even if it would end up trashed at least twice each year. Not that he could do anything about it. Well, he could, but putting up warding seals which required near mastery at Fuinjutsu was something he really couldn't do without causing outright suspicion. Finally making it back to his rundown apartment, Minato opened the door and was immediately attacked by the slightly rancid smell. He could tell that Naruto was used to it, but Minato sure as hell wasn't. Naruto, I'm so sorry. He thought with tears in his eyes. Even though Shinigami said this was all of no consequence of his actions, he couldn't help but feel completely responsible for the hell his son had to live through. Taking a deep breath, Minato began to clean his apartment out, ridding it of all trash, all the inedible food, 2 worn-out clothes, and everything he could do without. After throwing the large black plastic bag in the dumpster, his home looked considerably better, if not a bit empty. All he had now was a fairly large bookcase, dresser, nearly broken desk and table, a worn-out bed, outdated kitchen appliances, and the occasional spider here and there. Next step, clean everything. So he did. Taking one of the shirts he had saved for this purpose, Minato scrubbed the entire apartment down with a little soap he had and dusted the floor and wooden furniture. He would have made clones to make this all go quicker, but Minato knew he was being watched by Anbu, as they hadn't completely masked their presence since he was a child. While he couldn't tell if the Anbu was a Hyuga or not, he didn't want to take the risk of their eyes catching him correctly channeling his chakra to make solid clones. So he kept at a steady pace, taking breaks every now and then as his small body demanded. By the time the sun had set, his apartment looked 20 times better than it had earlier, and the smell had nearly completely faded. The next thing he did was take a shower, scrubbing down all the grime and sweat he had managed to produce onto his body. In the morning he would have to go out to buy actual food and not the lifetime supply of cupped ramen he currently had stashed in his cabinets. He would also have to buy some new clothes as well, ones to train in, and more casual clothes. It was a shame, but he wouldn't be able to buy kunai or shuriken until he was an academy student since he didn't have anyone to buy them for him. Making himself a cup of beef ramen afterwards, Minato walked over to his room and fell on a small bed, unconsciousness quickly taking over. He honestly couldn't get a break. It seemed that now that he was completely healed, Minato reverted back to his internal clock and woke up bright and early at 5 a.m. Damn it, I should have known this would happen, he thought to himself before getting up and fixing the bed. It was too early for the markets to be open, so Minato took to another ramen cup for breakfast. He had to wonder though, it seemed that Naruto's diet was almost always ramen, hadn't he gotten tired of eating the stuff? The memory of Kushina screaming, "Ramen is food of the gods, Minato. You can never get tired of ramen," came to mind and he realized this was yet another thing he had inherited from his head. Minato finished the small cup of ramen and he walked over to the long mirror in his room. He figured he would turn into an ordinary plain man, nothing too outstanding to distinguish him in a crowd. So 3 hand seals and a poof later, a dull-looking brown-haired, brown-eyed young man stood in front of the mirror. Yeah, this'll work. He thought to himself before he grabbed his small pouch of money and set off to the markets. Well, it was still too early for them to be open, the markets were deep in the civilian sector of the city, so it would take a short while walking from his apartment. As he continued to hold up the henge, Minato was practically giddy with really realizing just how much chakra he had at his disposal. With this, he would be able to do techniques he had only theorized because he would never have the chakra required. I'll show them all for you, Naruto, he thought as he looked to the morning sky. I'll show them just how amazing you can be. By the time he had made it to the market sector, the shops were just opening and there were a small number of shoppers looking at their goods. Thanks to his disguise, no one even took a second glance at him and merely gave him everything he needed at their proper prices. He smirked internally at it all, knowing that most of the store owners had kicked him out more than once. As soon as he was content with the food he had bought, Minato set to go back to high apartment, placing all the food in its proper places. He had stocked up on milk, juice, fruits, vegetables, rice, and spices he needed to make proper meals. The only thing he lacked was meat, but he would much rather hunt for it on his own, rather than pay the prices at the markets. Even without the outrageous prices he would have paid with his true face, they were far too high for an orphan boy living on a monthly allowance. All he needed to hunt was rope and a sharp knife, both of which were in his possession. While they were definitely not proper hunting tools, they would simply have to do. Sending out his senses to see if anyone was watching him, Minato sighed in relief to find out that no one was around and quickly formed the seals for the shadow clone technique. When 20-some Narutos poofed into existence, Minato groaned loudly. I have awful chakra control. It was going to be a pain to get his control back to the way he remembered he had it. Sighing, Minato dispelled all but one clone and charged it with more chakra so that it wouldn't dispel as easily. Okay, he said to his clone, I need you to go to the library and find out everything that's happened in the past 7 years, then go to the park and act like a kid. Do not allow yourself to get dispelled. Meet back here at 11:30. You got it, boss. The clone said, saluting to Minato. Good. Leave the apartment 15 minutes after I leave. With that, Minato took off, rope and the sharp kitchen knife in a small backpack on his shoulders. As soon as he was in the small alleyway, Minato hinged into the same man he was earlier and took off to training ground 2, which was deep in the heart of the Konoha forest. It was also one of the less frequently used training grounds, since most shinobi preferred a different setting to train in. It was, however, the best place to hunt outside of training ground 44, otherwise known as the Forest of Death, since you were more than likely to be eaten by the things you wanted to hunt. It was hardly rare to see a 10-foot evil-looking rabbit in that place. He was a bit surprised at how easily hunting came to him. After all, being in his son's body was no doubt going to have to take a little more getting used to, since he had been in a near 6-foot body when he died. To be suddenly shrunk down was disconcerting to say the least. Even so, Minato was able to capture a small number of rabbits and birds in the few hours spent there, more than enough to keep him sated for a while at least. Stuffing his kill inside the backpack, already emptied of their blood, Minato made his way back to his apartment to fully clean out his meat, which was the most annoying part in Minato's opinion. Still in his henge, he made his way to his apartment, meeting up with his clone on the way there, and dispelled it as soon as he knew no one was watching. The memories came in a rush, and Minato wanted to scream at the parents that told their kids he was a demon. Shrugging it off, knowing he couldn't do anything about it now, Minato silently cleaned the meat, keeping the rabbit fur in hopes of finding a use for them later. Wanting to do some training, Minato made a quick plum rice ball and made his way around the city in a decent pace. While he made sure to avoid as many civilians as possible, he could see that they took notice of a boy running around the city like a hooligan. But that didn't stop him. He was disgustingly tired by the end of his self-made obstacle course around the village, a distance equivalent to running 5 times around the city perimeters. Damn, he thought, I forgot how hard the first few months of real training was like. While his mind was ready for the strain, his body wasn't. Shaking himself to rid of the slight muscle tremors, Minato took to walking around a bit to cool his body down. I'll show you. He heard a voice proclaim, I will prove that hard work beats geniuses. Curious, Minato made his way around the corner where he saw 2 boys facing each other in the middle of the street. From the looks of the two, the boy who had a bowl-cut hairstyle and bushy eyebrows was the one who screamed. You cannot change your fate. One of the boys said. He was tall for an 8 or 9-year-old, his face slightly feminine, but his eyes proved he was a Hyuga, and from the bandages covering his forehead, a branch member. Fate has decreed you cannot defeat me. I will prove you wrong. The boy said again, fire practically burning in his eyes. The other boy seemed done with the conversation and simply turned to leave without another word. The crowd that had formed around him also dispersed as soon as they realized no fight would happen. The boy that was left stared at the back of the Hyuga boy, fierce determination in his eyes. I will prove it, the unnamed boy muttered to himself, I don't care what they say, I will prove it. Furious, Minato walked toward him, tapping his shoulder so he could get his attention. Once the boy turned around, Minato couldn't help but ask, why do you want to prove that? The boy stared at him for a while before saying, with fire in his eyes, because I will prove I can be better than geniuses. I'm not a dead last, just because I can't use chakra doesn't mean I can't be a ninja. Minato stared at the boy wide-eyed. Couldn't use chakra? That was practically a death blow to any ninja career. But the boy in front of him, he couldn't help but feel that it was possible. There were a few number of shinobi in the world who chose to use as little chakra as possible, Mido Guy was one of them. What's your name? Minato asked curious. To be honest, the resemblance between Guy and the boy was, maybe it was just the bushy caterpillar eyebrows. Rock Lee. He exclaimed with a wide grin. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Minato replied easily with a smile, you know, if you can't use chakra, why don't you just focus on taijutsu? You don't need chakra for that. As soon as he finished, Lee's eyes widened in sudden realization. Yosh. I will become the best taijutsu specialist Konoha has ever seen. Lee exclaimed, the fire in his eyes burning crazily. I haven't seen you in the academy before. He said questioningly. Lee was certain he would have noticed him, his blonde hair was kind of hard to not notice. No, I'm starting this year though. He replied with a wider grin. Honestly, he wasn't looking forward to 5 years at the academy, learning everything all over again. Yosh. Then I will help you. We can train together and I will teach you everything I can to prepare you. Lee exclaimed happily. Minato couldn't help but grin gratefully at the boy. Yes. Now I don't have to hide the fact that I'm training. Thank you, Lee. Yeah. Maybe we could ask one of the Jonins for help. I know. Let's go ask Jiji if he knows who we can ask. Internally, Minato was snickering. Oh, he was going to keep calling the man Jiji, it was way too much fun. Jiji? Lee asked confused. Yeah, Hokage Jiji. He'll definitely know who to ask. Minato said while grinning widely. You, Hokage-sama is your Jiji. Rock Lee seemed floored by the idea. Cocking his head to the side, Minato said, I don't think he is really, but he's old and like a Jiji to me. Nodding in acceptance, Lee said, okay, let's ask Hokage-sama for help. When Minato and Lee began making their way to the Hokage Tower, they spoke of their lives, likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams. As they continued talking, Minato couldn't help but feel he had found a lifelong friend. I'll help you, Lee. Minato thought as he listened to the energetic boy, we'll both prove everyone wrong. Minato was right. 100%, absolutely correct. Rock Lee and Mido Guy were like freaky twins, or Lee was some strange nature-induced mini-clone of Guy. Once the pair had arrived at the Hokage's office and asked Sarutobi who they could ask about helping them in their taijutsu while maintaining big bright puppy dog eyes so that the old man couldn't say no, they were introduced to the Jonin, Mido guy. The man hadn't changed much since Minato had last seen him. He was still as loud as he was 7 years ago and most definitely had the same bleached-looking smile and continued to spout out his somewhat confusing springtime of youth and how it burned brightly. Of course Lee had taken Guy in immediately. If it wasn't the fact that they looked so alike, it was the fact that Mido Guy readily agreed to help the two of them on his spare time. He was after all a Jonin, he had to go on missions to make a living. Minato, however, noticed the small nearly unimportant tapping of his finger the Hokage had been doing when he was talking to Guy about the possibility of training them. He was a bit annoyed that his memories of Anbu Morse code was faulty and he couldn't quite grasp the message he was giving Guy. Though he could guess it had to do with him in some way or another. Your flames of youth burn brightly. He exclaimed to them, displaying his wide pearly white smile at them, I will help you both, but I won't hold back so be prepared. From the corner of his eye, Minato saw Sarutobi flinch in sympathy. Guy couldn't be that bad in training, right? Sure he went through insane self-induced training regimes when he was alive, but that was mostly just to be able to beat his eternal rival Kakashi. With that errant thought, Minato wanted to face palm. The guy is going to rub us in Kakashi's face and declare he's a better teacher than him, so he wins some sort of unsaid competition. Wanting nothing more than to groan, Minato took in a small breath and said. I'll do my best not to disappoint you Guy-sensei. Bowing to his new teacher in respect. The small action made Sarutobi nearly drop his pipe. He was torn between feeling elated at the change Naruto was showing or crying at the fact that a near-death experience caused such a change. Yosh. I as well, Guy-sensei. I won't let you down. Lee exclaimed bowing to the man as well, albeit a little lower than Minato had. Good. Guy said happily, I have time tomorrow, so meet me at training ground 14 at 6 AM and we'll begin your training. Hi. The two boys said in unison. While he was somewhat dreading what Guy had in store for them, Minato couldn't deny he was feeling elated at the same time. Now, boys, Sarutobi's voice rang out in the room, I want you both to take this very seriously, while I ask Guy to remember that they are both only 7 and 8 years old. Meaning, this isn't something I normally do, and Guy, don't make them do anything even close to your normal. Training Minato couldn't help but smile, at least he wouldn't be thrown in the metaphorical waters without knowing how to swim. Of course, Hokage-sama. Guy exclaimed happily. He would have to make a conscious effort to not overexert the too eager potential shinobi. But could anyone really blame him if he got a little carried away? Their flames of youth burned so brightly. Good, good. Sarutobi said with a slightly amused smile, now, off with you all and enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, Naruto, here is your monthly allowance, yours as well Lee. He said grabbing 2 small envelopes and handing them over to the 2 orphans. On their way to the tower, both had confessed they were orphans, strengthening the growing bond between the two of them. Thanks, Gigi. Minato said with a bright smile. Finally. Now he could probably buy some decent furniture and maybe a new bed. Thank you, Hokage-sama. Lee said gratefully to the village leader. Lee, Minato began turning to his friend, want to come with me to buy some stuff? We can race to the market sector. Yosh. Let us see who is the fastest. Lee exclaimed excitedly, stuffing his envelope in his pocket. Thank you again, Hokage-sama. Without another word, both Minato and Lee dashed out of the office at their top speeds, which for the little training they had, was impressive. They are quite energetic. Guy observed as he watched the boys race to the other side of the village out of the Hokage's window. They are indeed. Sarutobi said with a small smile gracing his lips. It was nice to see Naruto act more like himself. Though he wasn't really surprised in this case. From all his time watching the boy, Sarutobi noticed an immediate lack of friends due to those ignorant civilians that told their children and others he was a demon. Watching the two boys acting like lifelong friends was most pleasing to see and it was obvious to him that Naruto would do anything to protect and help his first true friend. Said boy was none other than Rock Lee, an orphan child who just finished his first year at the academy. According to his file, the young eager student was the bottom of his class, dead last as so many people enjoyed to label the position as much to his annoyance. Though it was hardly his fault. Due to a birth defect the boy was unable to mold chakra, a death blow to most shinobi careers. Even so, he persevered and his taijutsu was something to take note of, as well as his scores on theory and the other written subjects. His complete lack at ninjutsu and jinjutsu was simply bringing his scores down. Perhaps he should change the scoring for the boy. It was clear he was eager and under Guy's tutelage would no doubt become a force to be reckoned with. I believe I will wait and watch his progress with Guy's training before I decide to do anything. Sarutobi thought to himself as he blew his pipe. So, Hokage-sama, you wish me to observe Naruto Uzumaki's during this? Guy asked for clarity. He noticed the Anbu Morse code that he was to take both the boys and train them as a mission that would be explained as soon as they left. He figured it would be to watch over the blonde-haired boy, as it was obvious the village thought him to be a demon and had been sent to the hospital on more than one occasion because of it. While it was true Guy held deep resentment for the Kyuubi, he held none for the poor Jinchuriki that was forced to hold it. Only pity and gratitude. He didn't, however, know the boy's true parentage. Yes, Saratobi said, unsurprised by the Jonin's deduction, I'm sure you have heard about the incident earlier this week. With a noticeable flinch, Guy nodded. Hi, Hokage-sama. Then you should know there have been much changes in Naruto since then. I want you to keep an eye on him, make sure he isn't traumatized and unstable because of the event, and teach him to the best of your ability. I know he will be great one day. Knowing full well the implications of his assignment, Guy nodded seriously, of course, Hokage-sama. I have won this most youthful race. Lee exclaimed happily as he stopped on the edge of the market sector of the village, Minato only a few seconds behind him. Minato couldn't help but let out a breathy laugh. Just a little while spent with the guy and Lee had picked up Guy's verbal tic. In my defense, I ran about 5 laps before this. Minato said, taking deep needed breaths. Then we shall do this again another day when you are fully rested. Lee himself was taking deep breaths also, but looked as though he were prepared to continue running and have no complaint if someone said he couldn't stop until told so. Minato knew after this, without a shadow of a doubt, that Rock Lee would grow to be feared in the elemental nations one day. For sure. The blonde replied with his trademark grin, though it was a bit more sincere than his usual ones. Looking out to the bustling market, Minato frowned a bit. Already he could see the glares pointed his way and Lee because he was near him without causing him harm. Turning to face Lee once more, he said, I have to change really quick, Lee. I'll be right back. Not waiting for his new friend's answer, Minato made his way back a few blocks and ducked into a small alleyway to hinge into a dull-looking 8-year-old civilian kid. Dark hair, dark eyes, and no outstanding looks, basically a younger version of his older version. Walking back out calmly in order to blend in with the crowd, Minato made his way back to Lee and couldn't help but smirk at his befuddled expression. Hey, I'm back. Minato said with a smile. Naruto? Lee asked unsure. Yup. Jiji taught me the Henge Jutsu and I want to practice with it. A lie, but he doubted a 8-year-old boy would understand the actual truth. Explaining complex methods on the seals used to cage the Kyuubi was simply information that would well go over the kid's head. Amazing, Naruto. Lee exclaimed with a fist raised to the air, training during something so simple. I will strive to do the same. Laughing outright now, Minato merely nodded at his friend and suggested they make way to the market and shop. It was about 2 hours later that Minato and Lee had parted ways at his apartment with a more than enthusiastic goodbye on Lee's part. The boy was someone that Minato, had he not had experience with Guy, would easily be exhausted by. Thankfully, he had experience, so it was far easier to get along with him. By the door were a few bags of items he had bought. A few scrolls on chakra control, as well as a small number of blank ones, a nicer futon, a journal, and a number of ink and pens he would be using to regain a grasp at seals. He knew that with his current control, it would be beyond stupid to even attempt seal work. Fuinjutsu demanded some control, but most importantly, complete and utter focus. Besides, he couldn't be caught doing anything too advanced until he found someone to tell him the basics of Fuinjutsu. Since, for the most part, after that it was all experimental work. Having Jiraiya teach him again came to mind, but having no memory of the man ever coming to see Naruto before made him seriously doubt he would be his teacher in anything. Next time I see that damn pervert, he's in for a hell of a lot of pain. I'll make Tsunade look merciful. Minato screamed in his mind. He still couldn't believe that the man he considered a father would abandon his son as he had done. He was a bit more, but not so much, lenient on Tsunade. She hadn't particularly been fond of Konoha for obvious reasons, but both she and Jiraiya could have raised Naruto outside of Konoha until he was supposed to take the Genin graduation exam. Throwing out his current futon and replacing it with a new one, Minato flopped down on it happily. Not even 2 days here and he cleaned his home, made a new friend, and got himself a teacher. So far, so good. He would have to make sure to ask Guy if there was any chance he could teach him the Academy Ninjutsu before going, or perhaps simply the theory behind it so he could figure it out himself. Already knowing the transformation technique would probably be a good reason to want to learn more. After all he needed in order to bring up the Kage Bushin was a failed Academy Bushin. Even Guy would be able to tell he had too much chakra to ever be able to perform that low-taxing technique. Taking the few moments to rest his small body, Minato reached for his new brown leather-bound journal. He had a number of filled journals hidden away in the Namikaze manor, along with the entire family fortune, heirlooms, and scrolls on both Kushina's and his own techniques. The estate would have been the first thing to get back to, but he had foolishly, at least in retrospect, keyed Saratobi in the seals, so should anyone ever open them up again, he would know immediately. So he wouldn't be able to even touch the Namikaze grounds until the man told him of his true parentage. Damned it, that would have helped out so much. He thought to himself as he began to write a detailed entry about his past couple of days. It wasn't a surprise to him when he left 3 filled pages in his journal a short time afterward. He had always described his days with detailed clarity. He used the entries to relive his more pleasant memories and for when he needed to remember a certain event for war planning. Now, he would do the same to see in a couple of years where he had began and how far he had progressed. There was still some time for him to get things done, so Minato once again released his senses in order to see if anyone was watching him. Once finding there was no one, he made a small number of clones, commanding each of them to hinge into a completely other person. Both his age and older, and sent them out to different training grounds to work on chakra control, while he himself was off to the Forest of Death to do more strenuous training. The nature chakra the place emitted was more than enough to mask his small body, especially if he made it to the far end of the forest that neared the border of Konoha. It wasn't too difficult sneaking his way to the training ground. Many people, for good reasons, strayed away from the place and its surrounding areas. As soon as he was far enough in, Minato made a score of clones, having them pair up and spar, while he himself began to go through the beginning steps of his infamous Rasengan. This time, he planned to complete the technique and successfully add on the elemental aspect to the swirling ball of chakra. Right now, he was simply concerned with getting back to being able to perform the technique. He continued till the sun overhead began to make its descent, leaving the sky to shift to a vibrant mix of orange, red, and yellow, with a darkening sky trailing it not far behind. Sending a mental command to his clones, the ones in the other training grounds immediately dispelled themselves, the memories of their training attacking him immediately. Waiting a few seconds, he dispelled the others in small groups, with a 5-second interval between each dispelling, so he wouldn't be inflicted with a headache. One of his clones gave him the memories of a small boy and Uchiha from the red fan on the back of his shirt, watching him intensely. He didn't seem to have any training, otherwise he would have masked his presence. Instead it seemed the boy was content with simply watching him. Thankfully, the clone did nothing to advertise the fact that he knew the boy was watching him and when he was given the command to dispel, had made his way out of the boy's line of sight. He looked about Naruto's age. Minato thought to himself before disregarding the event altogether. The boy could be any number of children born to the Uchiha clan around the time Naruto was born. He could even be the youngest son of the clan head, Fugaku for all he knew, or the son of a civilian hoping to one day be a shinobi like so many of his clan. With his body shaking, Minato made his way home slowly, the sky blackened completely by the time he had made it to the front of his apartment door, leaving on the streetlights to illuminate the streets. Rubbing his eyes, Minato went to the kitchen to make himself a much-needed dinner. With the help of a shadow clone, his food that consisted of well-cooked rabbit meat, rice, and a large number of steamed vegetables was readily waiting on the table for him to eat. The food, he realized, tasted fantastically. He knew he was a good cook, but certainly not of this caliber. He's never been able to eat anything like this, Minato thought to himself as he stared sadly at his meal. His Naruto was at a time forced to dumpster dive to go to sleep without the pain of an empty stomach. His Naruto had been forced to eat rotten fruits to get even the smallest of nutrition. His Naruto had been forced to eat the cheapest of cupped ramen constantly because that was all anyone was willing to sell to him. He realized he was crying when he took a small bundle of soaked rice in his mouth but continued eating regardless of the freely falling tears. "You're happy now, Naruto, aren't you?" The unspoken question remained unanswered, only his gut and the words of the death god giving him comfort. As the meal was finished, Minato made his way to shower before falling on his futon, dried and dressed, allowing his drooping eyes to close and sleep to take over. Like the day before, Minato woke bright and early at 5 a.m. It was the perfect time to wake up as his first day of training with Guy was in an hour at training ground 14. Not wanting to waste any time, he scrambled out of his futon, leaving a mess of blankets strewn over it before heading to his dresser and changing into proper training clothes. He donned simple black pants that had a number of pockets that could be used to store both shuriken and kunai, a form-fitting dark blue shirt that stretched well with his movements and comfortable shoes that were fit for running, and anything else the Taijutsu specialist would demand of him. Afterwards, he didn't bother brushing his hair, he was going to work out, not go on a date or some important meeting. He did, however, brush his teeth and put on a heavy amount of deodorant. He most certainly did not want to smell. That was simply one of the many things Minato would always value, self-hygiene. Which was probably why he had such trouble talking and being close to the Inuzukas as they always had a small lingering smell of wet dog. Once done with that, he went and made himself a simple small breakfast, not wanting to eat too much and cause him to hurl later on during the training. A simple plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and a healthy cup of milk later, Minato was more than prepared for anything Guy had in store for him. Looking at the clock hung on the far wall of his living room area, he noticed he had 15 minutes before 6. With a small stretch of his arms, Minato exited his apartment, locking the door's many locks, and headed out with himself and a small bag filled with a bottle of water, bandages, just in case, and his house keys. At his top speed, he would make it to the training ground with more than enough time to spare, so he decided to take his time and let the food settle more in his stomach, leaving him to arrive just on time. As he entered the heart of training ground 14, Minato saw that Lee was already waiting and doing the basic academy stretches in preparation. "Ah, Naruto. So you have arrived." Lee exclaimed, stopping his stretching and walked over to his new friend. Minato greeted him with a wide grin, his hands resting at the back of his head. "Hey Lee. See you're here early." "Yes. I simply could not wait to begin our training," the boy said with vigor. Shaking his head amused, Minato said. "You know, as a shinobi, we should always strive to be on time." Once he knew that Lee's focus was solely on what he was saying, he continued, "If we're early, then we could be caught in an ambush. If we're late, we could be too late to do anything to help." His afterthoughts lingered on the small Uchiha boy that he had taught once upon a time. Obito Uchiha was by far the most un-Uchiha he had ever met. Rather than his face being in a permanent superior expression, the boy wore his emotions clearly on his face and was never one to shy away from crying in public. The boy who was always late to their training sessions with the most outrageous excuses, Minato couldn't help but laugh as they got more and more ridiculous. "Honestly, who would believe, a black cat crossed my path, so I had to take the long way around and then I got lost on the road of life." The memory of his past student brought a small frown to his face before he wiped it clean off when he realized he didn't have the time to be thinking about his past and turned his entire focus back to reality with one small promise to visit the memorial stone. Before Lee could comment on that, Mido Guy made his dramatic entrance. With a swirl of smoke and leaves leaving Lee practically star-struck at the sight. Standing in what he deemed his good guy pose, Guy looked at his youngest new student with a slightly calculating gleam in his eyes before exclaiming in a much too loud voice for the morning. "Young Naruto is correct. We must always be prepared for anything. Being too early or too late could be detrimental to any mission." While the calculating look was masked in his eyes now, Minato mentally groaned. He really needed to be more careful from now on. "Hi Guy-sensei." Lee exclaimed with a small salute, "I shall always be on time from now on." "That is good my most youthful students." Guy more than happily exclaimed. "Now, onto the training. First, we stretch." "Hi." Both the boys exclaimed. They spent a fair amount of time stretching their muscles in preparation for what was to come. While he wasn't expecting it to be scarcely close to how harshly he trained during his prime, but with Guy, even with the Hokage's order, would be very strenuous on his small 7-year-old body. Boy was he horribly right. The moment they were done, Guy handed them their very own training weights. 4 each, 2 each arm, and the other 2 for each leg. While each weight held a mere 2 pounds, the extra 8 pounds actually made a difference. At first it felt like nothing, but as Guy made them continue to run around the training ground, Minato and Lee found it harder and harder to maintain the same pace they began and started to slow down. It was the moment they felt as though their legs were going to turn to putty that Guy had them stop. Of course that was after 20-some laps. Without waiting much time for them to rest their small bodies, as Guy believed they lost momentum that way, he had them do 3 sets of push-ups, sit-ups, and squats that had his body absolutely burning. He honestly couldn't remember the last time he had sweat so much or felt so much pain rippling through his muscles. Looking to Lee, it was obvious he felt the same way. Regardless, both boys never uttered a word of complaint. He knew that he couldn't do any actual techniques until he built up his body strength and agility. At least out in the open, however desperately he wanted to show off and be deemed a prodigy. He still could be deemed a prodigy of course, and the Hokage would accept it without much doubt. During his life, he was Rookie of the Year and surpassed the older and his own generation in strength, intelligence, and skill. He was deemed a prodigy because of his near photographic memory and his ability at absorbing information and techniques like a dry sponge. If not from him, then from Kushina. She was one of the best, if not the best kunoichi in the Leaf during their life. But that would have to wait a bit longer. At least he could show his potential in this training and then much more during the academy. He would do everything possible to skip at least a single grade. The first few years of the academy were torture the first time. He did not need to relearn basic reading, writing, and history from the school all over again, or in this case, the first time. He most certainly wouldn't mind the possibility of being put on Lee's genin team. By the time they should be graduating, the two would have unmatchable teamwork because of their training and friendship. It was at the near end of their training session with Guy that Minato saw the heartwarming familiar face of his past masked student, Kakashi. He thought as he looked at the older version of his student he left behind 7 years ago. He was 21 now, if his math was correct. He had missed out on his 21st birthday, he had missed his first legal drink. By the gods, he had missed so much. Doing everything to keep his face as passive as he could, Minato stared with sweat dripping from his face freely as Guy greeted him. "Ah. My eternal rival." He screamed, pointing a finger dramatically at Kakashi, "You have finally chosen to make an appearance." Kakashi on the other hand, had his face nose deep in an oh so familiar orange book. "Damn it." He mentally cursed, "When did Jiraiya corrupt my student? I'll strangle that man." Minato thought, furiously frustrated at the man while keeping a natural-looking confused expression on his face. He couldn't have an ounce of recognition in his face, it wasn't as if Kakashi had ever introduced himself as the Inuanbu before or any time before. Kakashi said with a bored expression in his visible eye, "You say something." I, on the other hand, simply shook his head before exclaiming, "Ah, Kakashi. You and your hip attitude. Enough of that, you are very late. The shinobi should always be on time," Lee proclaimed with a raised fist. It was obvious he had taken what both Guy and he had said to heart. "Sorry, there was an old lady who dropped her groceries, so I had to help. Then she kept me for tea and I couldn't just say no," he said in a deadpan voice while his eye crinkled into a familiar eye smile. While both Guy and Lee looked at him with mirrored disbelieving expressions, Minato could scarcely contain the sorrow he felt for his student. "Is this how you grieve for your friend, Kakashi?" He thought to himself, "Is this how you remember him?" One look in Kakashi's slightly narrowed eyes, Minato wiped the look to keep an innocently confused expression. "Let me introduce you to my most youthful students," his part-time teacher said to his eternal rival. "This is Rock Lee and Naruto Uzumaki. Boys, this is Kakashi Haddock." "Hello, Kakashi-sensei," Lee said exclaimed with a small bow. "Hello, Kakashi-senpai." Minato was able to make out without any hesitation. It was way too weird to even consider Kakashi his teacher when it was him who had taught the boy when he was younger. Near the end of his life, he was happy to admit their relationship was similar to that of an older brother or another father-type figure. He could imagine how badly Minato had hurt him when he willingly left him and the rest of the realm of the living. "Yo." He replied with a small wave of his hand, his other still grasping the damned orange book. "I have asked Kakashi here to help oversee your training," Guy said happily with his bleached smile. Lee looked upon both their teachers with a new fire burning in his eyes, while Minato simply couldn't help the surprised expression fall upon his face. Oh, the irony. His student was going to teach him. Well, at least soon. He doubted Kakashi's role as overseer would last very long with the way Lee and Guy got along so fantastically. It wouldn't be a surprise if Lee became Guy's apprentice, and he would be ecstatic for his friend should that happen. Even so, it took everything in Minato's power not to fall to the ground and laugh hysterically. Doing everything in order to keep his voice calm and even, Minato finally said, "Thank you, Kakashi-sensei. That's just too weird," he thought to himself while keeping eye contact with his old student. "Hi. Thank you very much, Kakashi-sensei," Lee exclaimed in a loud voice. "H.N., you've done too much to do anything today else. Next time I'll let you know how you're doing," Kakashi said while reading his book, letting out a small perverted giggle escape his lips as he turned the page. Oh, he was definitely going to strangle Jiraiya. "Yes. You both did wonderfully today. We shall train again like we did this morning in 4 days. For now, rest and prepare, for it will only get harder. I also ask that you keep your weights on at all time, it will help you greatly," Guy said to the two. "Hi." Both Minato and Lee agreed in unison before watching both Kakashi and Guy disappear in a swirl of leaves and smoke. Wanting to look like the child he was supposed to be, Minato mumbled loudly enough for Lee to hear, "I so have to learn that. Gosh. Today was most wonderful. I shall train like today before we train with them again," Lee proclaimed with visible fires burning in his eyes. Weird, he thought to himself, I would say that's a genjutsu, but that's not possible. Brushing the thought aside, Minato took a few slightly shaky breaths before turning to his friend, "I'll join you, Lee, but right now I think it'd be best if we both got something to eat." "You're right, Naruto. We should eat to regain our strength and rest for training tomorrow." "Yeah, let's go to that BBQ house," Minato suggested with a smile. "Yosh. A good idea. Let us go." "So what do you think?" Mido Guy asked his longtime friend and rival seriously. Taking an unusual pensive face, Kakashi thought back on the time he watched the two boys, more specifically, Naruto Uzumaki, during their training. Anyone with even the slightest shinobi training would be able to see that Naruto walked with grace only experienced shinobi had. Additionally, the Bond, who was nearly killed a few days prior, had took everything that Guy was telling them with a knowing look in his eyes. As though Guy were only restating something he already had drilled into him. What caught his eye most of all, however, was when he had first shown himself to the boys. In Naruto's sky blue eyes were an unmistakable look of deep sorrow directed at him. It didn't make sense for him to have such an expression, especially not one directed at him, since he had never openly met the child before this. Kakashi didn't know exactly what to make of his late sensei's son. A few days ago, he would have said that the boy was like any other, loud, happy, and full of childish innocence. Now, it was as though he were a completely different person. His eyes practically glowed with experience and pain no child should ever know. He knew that Naruto was never dealt a fair hand at life. From the moment he was born, Naruto was chosen as the village's scapegoat, its pariah. The boy never knew the love of a parent, nor the comfort and warmth of a home. The orphan boy knew no comforts that of any other children born into the village knew. As Anbu, Kakashi had seen the worst of it all. He had come across the boy surrounded by shinobi and civilian alike kicking and punching the boy mercilessly. He had seen with his own eyes as the boy stabbed repeatedly and nailed to an alley wall. He had nearly watched a drunken civilian burn Naruto alive. Each time, he was just shy from preventing the attacks from happening. Every time, Kakashi had barely made it in time to save him from death. Each time, Kakashi knew he failed his teacher and father figure. It killed him to know that the Anbu commander was forcing Kakashi to have the later shifts for when he was asked to protect the Yondame's legacy, making him disregard the fact that he was captain. He knew that masked bastard enjoyed watching Kakashi struggle harder and harder each time to save Naruto from the attacks. He was getting closer and closer to simply killing the man. Yet, even so, the small boy, who lived his own personal hell on earth, still continued to smile. The small boy still continued to laugh as though the world could do no wrong. The small boy still continued to dream and run and play as though he hadn't been scorned, thrown out of shops, or starved all his life. He was, simply put, an amazing and pure child. The day had shown that child was now gone. He still showed some of the same childish antics, but they seemed more forced than genuine. Looking to his friend, Kakashi said, "I'm not sure what to think. But something isn't right, he moves as though he's been training for years." "I thought the same." Guy admitted, "Do you think it has to do with his tenant?" he asked, not wanting to believe the demon was influencing the boy. Kakashi had thought it was a possibility as well, but the very thought that the demon took control over Naruto was something he couldn't think about without pain eloping his heart. Even so, he couldn't deny it was plausible. "We cannot know anything for certain, yet." Kakashi said, "But we need to report to the Hokage and see what he believes is the best course of action." Nodding seriously, Guy and Kakashi shushed into the Hokage's office. After having lunch with Lee, the two went their separate ways. Lee went off to go home to rest before he began training again, while Minato left to walk around the streets of Konoha, knowing full well of the Anbu that was trailing him. Minato thought he might go see if he could catch a glimpse of his old friends. He knew that the only one he had a chance of seeing casually was Inoichi, as he always made it a point to work in his clan shop personally, along with his wife, and if memory serves, his daughter as well. He remembered when little Ino was born, a few months shy from Naruto's own. She was a perfect mix of both Inoichi and his wife, taking his blonde hair and her mother's eyes. When Inoichi's wife was going into labor, they, meaning Minato, Chaozu, Hiashi and his Ashi, were all out drinking, talking about their wives, and simply having a good time. They had been in a drunken stupor when Inoichi's clan member came rushing in, babbling up a storm about his wife being in the hospital. Even though the boy continued to repeat that his wife was in labor, it took over 5 minutes before he finally got what he was trying to say and rushed to the hospital. The sight of a red-faced panicked Inoichi would forever be engraved into his mind, it was simply a priceless moment in his life. That, and the look of sheer and utter love in his friend's eyes when he presented his daughter Ino to him. "I wish I could tell you all I am here," he thought to himself sadly as he walked toward the Yamanaka's flower shop. "I wish I could tell you all I was sorry. Tell you all I'm sorry for not saying goodbye." As soon as he made it to the front of the store, the scent of freshly cut flowers assaulted his senses, leaving him feeling calmer and serene. Taking in a deep breath, Minato walked into the shop, immediately greeted by none other than Inoichi himself. "How can I help you today?" he asked in a polite voice. Minato knew that he was one of the few in the village that actually knew Naruto was his son. While he was disappointed none of his friends ever took Naruto in, he knew that they would have fought tooth and nail to adopt the son of their late friend. He was sure, when the Hokage decided he was old enough to know his true lineage, he would discover why they hadn't adopted him, and why they hadn't done much, if anything, to help him throughout his life. Looking up at his friend shyly, Minato said, "I wanted to get some flowers for, a memorial." Inoichi looked at the small boy in front of him and couldn't hide his surprise. For one, he was surprised that his best friend's son was in his shop, but shocked that he was asking for flowers specifically for a memorial. "May I ask why you want flowers for a memorial?" he asked, unable to hold the question back. A bit startled that his friend, who was a certified therapist, would ask such a personal question so bluntly, he decided to answer honestly. Hokage told me that my parents died protecting the village from the Kyuubi. I never, thanked them for saving me and the village, so I thought I could do it now," he said, not looking at his friend, and rather found a certain spot on the floor to be far more interesting. Taking a deep breath, Inoichi had to stop himself from telling Naruto that his father was the sole reason the village wasn't burned to the ground. The reason that everyone was still alive and well. That his father was the hero among heroes. That his mother was the best kunoichi in the village. That his parents loved him with all their heart. That he wasn't a demon, just the jailer, and should be treated as a hero for the burden he had to bear. But in doing so, he would break the damned SS rank village secret and law the Sandaime Hokage placed shortly after Naruto's birth and personally sign his death certificate. "I see," he finally said with a sorrowful glint in his eyes, "I have the perfect thing for that." Leaving the small blonde-haired whiskered child for a moment, Inoichi picked up a small bundle of flowers, the combination of flowers that meant remembrance, thanks and love. "Here you are," he said, kneeling down to the boy's height and handed him the small bundle. "Thank you," Minato said with a small bow, "how much do I owe you?" With a kind smile, Inoichi merely shook his head, "Just keep them and pay respect to your parents for me." "Thank you very much," Minato said with a genuine grin. He knew he could count on his friend to show kindness to his son, even though he couldn't openly. Had he lived, he would have protected Naruto from anything and everything. For Inoichi, openly protecting Naruto or having his family show him any kindness would bring the village's wrath upon his family, and that was something he could not do. No matter how hard it was to see his friend's son suffer. At least in the confines of his shop, he could show the boy a small kindness. With a happy smile, Minato left the shop and continued on his way home. He couldn't go specifically to the memorial stone, as the Anbu was still trailing him, but he could place them on his apartment windowsill and pray that his son and wife were happy with Kami. That his son was finally feeling the comfort and love from the embrace of his mother. That Naruto was feeling truly safe for the first time in his life. That his Naruto was finally truly happy. When he made it home, it was mid-afternoon. The sun glazing his back with a warmth that Kushina's smile always brought him. Bounding into his apartment, Minato placed a bundle of flowers in a small vase and placed it on the windowsill. With a smile of his own, Minato turned to leave his apartment once more, deciding to spend the rest of his day in the library, reading up on the history of Konoha. Soon, he would be starting the academy, the start of the year was a mere couple of weeks away. Minato had every intention on making his son considered a prodigy and to his friend, a genius of hard work. "Watch me, Naruto. Watch me as your dreams become a reality." To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next part.